Okay. Okay, here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our final session of Cinema Talks, Creating Strong Female Characters for Films and Series, organized with the support of the US Embassy in Ankara and the Netherlands Consulate General in Istanbul. I am very honored and proud to present such great filmmakers who have made films about women that can inspire us as we try to change the way women are perceived and treated. We believe in the power of the media, changing the way people think. And with your contribution, let this be one of the first steps. Thank you very much. Now I leave the word to Emine Yıldırım, our moderator.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Creating Strong Female Characters for Films and Series. I'm Emine Yıldırım, and today we have amazing artists with us. First, I'd like to introduce director-writer Sacha Polak, and then development executive Sacha Gertsik, director-writer Halina Reijn, and the amazing Carice van Houten, actress and producer. And today we're going to be not only talking about general issues about creating female characters and the process, but also about two very special films. One first directed by Halina Reijn, Instinct, starring Carice van Houten, and secondly, Dirty God, directed by Sacha Polak. But first, we will discuss the film Instinct, but let us watch a trailer of the film, and then we will continue. So, Mert, perhaps you'd like to give the trailer of the film?
Predators attuned to their particular prey. Vulture. These two.
Zou je mij in je eigen woorden kunnen vertellen waarom je hier bent?
Het is niet echt iets wat je gemakkelijk vertelt op een eerste afspraakje.
Jenny!
Vind je me aantrekkelijk, is dat het? Ik weet wat liefde is. En jij?
Once again, congratulations on this wonderful movie. And to begin, maybe most of our audience members actually watched the film for this panel, but just to remind them of the small summary of the film is about the experienced psychologist Nicoline, who works at a penal institution and dangerously becomes infatuated and intimate with one of the inmates. And then a beautiful film about power dynamics and many other issues ensues. First, Halina, I'd like to begin with you. This is your first feature film. You're also an actress, so you're a seasoned professional. And so I wanted to ask you, what drew you to this project initially? Why this particular film as your first film? And because it's a very beautiful but challenging film. So I was curious as to what made you want to make the story?
Yeah, well, I think I saw a documentary about this subject one night on Dutch television, and I really was intrigued by this story, of course, and I wondered how it was possible. And having been a theater actress mainly and playing all these classical roles, you know, Shakespeare, Chekhov, Ibsen, I always felt that these kind of dynamics with power and gender roles and sexuality were always a big part of my life on stage. But all of these plays were written by men and all of these plays were directed by men. So I felt this was a great vehicle, this particular story of this therapist, to talk about the same themes that I experienced as an actress, but then in my own way and sort of from a female gaze. So the themes were always of interest to me, and that's why I think I decided to do this story, but I never really thought about it in that way. I just felt an urge to make it, but I never strategized my career. I was like, what is going to be my first film? I was just like, oh, let's just do this, you know?
Yeah,
sorry
course.
For
that's great, you know, because
I don't know how to stop that.
No. That's fine. And you're also, you're both producers on this project. You know, in a way, it's, you know, from what I understand, you developed it together from the beginning and made it together also in development and in the production process. So I wanted to ask about both of your collaboration throughout the years in that sense, because you've worked together before. So I was wondering how you decided to make this project together.
Well, it started really. I mean, we've done a lot of stage plays as well together. We've even done a little film, I think, or a TV show. I remember a few scenes that we did on screen, and then we decided to make a style guide that was sort of an anti-style guide to sort of show the backside of glamour. We called it anti-glamour. It was sort of a fun book for us to make, and then it turned out that we really liked actually working together and creating things together. And then yeah, when Halina, of course, at a certain point in our careers, we were both a little bit fed up with just being the yeah, what's the word? Uitvoerders?
Actresses.
Yeah, the actresses or the artists, and we wanted to have a bit more control and just create things ourselves. And then this story came along when Halina saw the documentary, and then it went from there, basically.
Wow.
Yeah, and I
that's
think
great.
producing for us is only a goal to have more creative freedom, and more control over any project
Yeah,
that we want to do. So it was more that than that we thought, oh, we should be these big producers. Not at all, but we just thought that would
of
be a
course.
way for us, and especially because we were both actresses, nobody really took us seriously in the beginning, and I mean, rightly so, maybe. But so we sort of had to put on a suit and an armor in order for people to think, oh, maybe they have
Yeah.
something share that will be actually interesting.
Yeah, I completely understand. I think it's usually the way you find yourself having to produce, to wanting to make the things you want to make, in a sense.
Yes, exactly.
And you were just mentioning about the female gaze, which is incredibly important. And in that sense, Nicoline, the character, is a very complex character, and absolutely we cannot reduce her to anything, which is what is so beautiful about her. And so actually I wanted to learn about how you collaborated on creating this character together. What was important for you? What did you watch out for? So it's because I think this is an important question for many filmmakers who actually must and wish to write women who actually live, are alive, and they're not two-dimensional objects. So I'm very curious about the development process of Nicoline.
Yeah, I think in creating that character, we created it with a writer, Esther Gertsik, who we also create our TV show with. So of course it's also very much her creation. And I think for me personally, as a director or whatever I am, I don't know. I think it's really important that a female character, of course, is layered and that there are conflicting elements within the character. I think for men it's more normal to have, we can see all these huge TV shows and films, and also in the classical plays, like I've been part of, all the male characters have always maybe a sort of layeredness to them, and conflicting elements inside them, and dilemmas that are interesting, and intellectual questions that are interesting. And for me, the only role I experienced as that was Hedda Gabler. It's the only role that I think asks herself like existential questions, and all other big female parts in theater never ask. They only say, I don't know, if they're alone on stage, So this is what we wanted to do with Nicoline, is create this very exciting, strange, non-pleasing, non-smiling, because all female characters have to smile every couple of minutes. Character like that was our aim.
Yeah, well, that's beautiful. And in that sense, I was curious, was it because actually it's how do you say, it's a paradox. Actually, it's a very human character, it's very realistic, but then again it's one of these characters which we're newly seeing on screen, perhaps a female anti-hero, or someone not to be immediately empathized with. So in that sense, was it easy to, let's say, finance the film, or, convince, other collaborators or funding bodies to make this film?
Well, I think it was not so easy, but it was a very small film, so that helped. We both decided we thought it was good to start out very small, because also, I mean, we had to prove ourselves also to ourselves. It could have completely failed. We didn't know if we could do it. But it was, of course, a lot of talk, and I mean, there still is, about that the character is not likable enough or not relatable enough, which I also think is a very fair argument. I don't say it's wrong, because I do think this character is not very relatable for a lot of people. I mean, for me it is, but I can imagine that it's a very annoying character for a lot of people. But that doesn't mean that I still wanted to create this character. And in Holland, there's this beautiful system of government money where you can actually, it's hard to get into, but if you are there, you can actually experiment with your filmmaking, and you don't have to make money like in New York, where I am right now. So I think that enabled us to do this. But of course, I think your question implies that for a lot of people, it's very hard if you want to create a character like this, a female character that is not likable, that is not relatable in the sort of classical sense, that is still hard to get, especially if you want to make a big movie. We wanted to make a small movie, but if you want to make a big movie, it's still very hard to create characters like this for females, I think.
Yeah. And also it's uncomfortable sometimes for people to watch things that are so raw and so so close to a certain thing that we don't want to see of ourselves. You know, it's a really dark spot within ourselves that you are forced to look at, and that's for a lot of people very uncomfortable to watch. You know, some people take away something, feel consoled by it, and feel that they've been understood and they recognize themselves, and some people just don't want to go there. So I think that makes it also a sort of an interesting movie to watch.
Yes, absolutely. No, I mean, it's very interesting. It's an interesting movie. And first of all, it's very, I think it's great that it doesn't give you any easy answers. And sometimes, there are no easy answers. It's just you have to think and explore and, go to that, darkest, edge of the universe and to contemplate about something. So in that sense, I was also curious because, the film traveled a lot. It's premiered in Toronto and, also in Locarno, and went to many festivals around the world. So, for example, what were the audience reactions that you saw throughout this, the film's journey? Did you find, for example, positive feedback or just people being curious? Did you find what you expected, or were you surprised pleasantly, perhaps?
Mostly very emotional. Yeah. Sorry. Now, just the thing that really stuck with me was that big camera guy. Remember that he was doing some sort of backstage thing of us filming us at the premiere in Locarno, and he just came back sobbing like this big guy. So it also showed us that it's not just about women, it's also like something within ourselves that everyone recognizes to a certain degree.
Yeah. No, I think that what Carice is saying also, I really agree with her that like the addictive behavior of this woman is something we all recognize, the destruction and all of that, but there were some very hostile reactions. We had a press conference in Locarno and there was somebody who was really attacking us. They found that we glorified rape. So we've been getting overall extremely positive reactions, but the film wasn't released in America, for instance, where there was so much attention for the film, and there still is. Like, it's almost like as if it's a forbidden film, and they give it to each other, but they don't want to release it because they say it's anti-feminist. It's it's wrong for women, this film. They say it gives a wrong example. Yeah. It's not. So I've had some very intense discussions also in London and after talk where a therapist stood up and attacked me and said, like, a male therapist, of course. He said, like, a female therapist would never do this. But we based this on a true story, on multiple true stories. So, but of course, if you make a provocative film, you should expect this. So we embraced every reaction, and I also don't believe it's a good film or anything at all. I just think it is a sort of cry for me personally. I'm like, I don't understand myself, so here's my film. This is my question to you. Who am I? Why am I so conflicted? Why am I sexually this way, and in my work this way, and as a daughter this way, and as a wannabe mother that way? And so it's just a cry for help, this film. So you can sort of say whatever you want to us, and I think it's all fine and it's all interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sorry to hear about the male therapist, but I'm not surprised. But then again, saying anti-feminist is such a big statement, and it's it's always that's the problem. Sometimes I think people still see films maybe not just as stories, but as if some sociological anti-themas that should be proving a thesis or something, and it's not about the thesis. And on the contrary, it's about allowing everyone, women and men, to tell the stories they want to tell.
Yeah.
And
for me, I think true feminism always is also that you are able, like, men have been able to ask themselves questions and study their own behavior for hundreds of years, and we have not in that way. So the luxury to look at a female as a victim and a perpetrator in one character, that is something women all long for. We want to see female psychopaths, we want to see female criminals, we want to see all of that. So that's why it's really strange that now all of us female directors should only create films about strong women, because that is so uninteresting. So I always think that's the strangest reason not to like this. Yeah, go, sorry.
Yeah. Now, there's just a lot of
Yes.
pressure on us women for such a long time to be a certain person or to be like a woman should be, because we don't get the examples. We have to not seen them, until now. So you do feel alone when you act differently, or you feel differently, or you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely, it's still, I suppose, a place to explore. I mean, because there's I mean, of course, there's a lot of literature and films, and yes, about women, written by women, but still, it's not enough, compared to, thousands of years of, male output. But nevertheless, thank you so much, and I will return. But now we will talk about Dirty Gods, Sacha Polak's film, which is also a brilliant film about a female character. So if we could actually have the trailer of Dirty God, please, Marit, and then we can.
Healed well, Jade. We're really pleased with your progress.
This was a particularly violent and horrible crime.
We need to see how things settle over the next 18 months or so.
So I'm left with this fucking dog's dinner.
I swear to God, Jade, one of these days I'm going to be happy with my body.
Plastic surgery go wrong for you, love?
Oh, this is a clinic online that can fix my face.
You don't know what you put me through, because all you ever think about is Jade.
I was still in hospital and my mum brought Ray to see me for the first time, and she comes in, she goes, monster. My mum, she's like, it's a nice monster, Ray. I'm damned.
You ain't damned. And what happened to you? It ain't got nothing to do with God, you know.
Compared to look and see that he destroyed you.
But he didn't, Mum. He didn't.
Okay, and we're back. Sacha, just to summarize again for our audiences who've already watched the film, most probably, but just to remind them, Dirty God, again, is a beautiful film which follows a young female character who finds herself, again, who rediscovers herself in life after a brutal acid attack. And what is so amazing about this film is that it is about a character who refuses to be victimized, although she's been attacked in a really brutal fashion. And so how I would like to begin is I'd like to ask you, this is actually your third feature film. And I was curious as to what inspired you, like the first idea that, why you wanted to make this film. Where did the idea come from?
It started when I saw a young burn survivor at a music festival, and I looked at her, and she was severely scarred, and I looked away and I saw everybody around her reacting the same way. And I thought, your face is your identity, it's your first portal of communication. So this woman has to deal with this every single day of her life. She can never hide from it. So that was sort of the initial idea. And then I was working in London a lot, and there I started writing this script and started interviewing young burn survivors. And then I heard about these acid attacks happening, and me and my co-writer Susie, we immediately thought, like, this is something we want to do, make a film about. This is so awful. The fact that it was mainly attacks from men doing it to women, and the idea was, if you're not beautiful for me, then you can not be beautiful for anybody else. So that was sort of what drew us, what was interesting dramatically for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, because we also have, unfortunately, a violent history of acid attacks in Turkey as well. So I think, many of the people who watch the film will, definitely understand and empathize, directly with Jade's journey. And in that regard, you have a very special casting process because could you talk about that a bit and how you got to work with Vicky as your lead actress? Because, that's also a very interesting story.
I thought immediately as well, like I wanted to make this film with a real burn survivor, and I want the audience to look at the film and feel the scars and feel that you are sort of, that your body is sort of aching and it's not movable. So we started the casting process very early on to find a real burn survivor who was the right age and from the right area, and etc. etc. So immediately we found Vicky Knight, and I saw her. I saw a little bit of footage of her online, and I liked her a lot. But she didn't want to have anything to do with us because she was sort of bullied by this TV program that called. It was sort of like she thought that they would do a documentary about her burns, but in fact it was sort of a sleazy reality TV show that called Too Ugly for Love, and they didn't tell her the title, and she got lots of hate mail afterwards. So it took us some time to convince her to meet me, but then she met me and she felt safe, and we built the rest of the casting around her. So I tested all the other actors with her, and to make sure that everybody felt good around each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I was, I'm going to get again to the character, but what I'm also curious about is how, what's very special in this film again is about, a very complicated woman who has her faults, who has her, good parts, who we cannot just, again, pigeonhole into anything, who's just, pure human, is about her, unabashedly trying to refine herself and reconstruct her life. Like she does not accept, yes, she was a victim, but now let's go on, let's live our lives. And, she doesn't wallow in self-pity. And I was wondering how you got to make that decision of, I'm going to write a character. Yes, she's a victim, but then again, she's not a victim. She's, something else. How was the creation process in that part?
That grew slowly. That is always like when you write, it sort of adds and adds and adds things to it. And Vicky was a big part of it as well. I think like to create a whole feature film around like one main character. I agree a lot with what Halina and Carice said before, like also that maybe the character is not per se so likable or something. I got that remark a lot on on actually all my films, that after a certain while I thought why don't I create likable characters? Is there a problem with me or something? But then I thought in the past there's a lot of female characters that can only be there as sort of support actress for a man, or just to be beautiful or just smiling. And these characters they go through a whole journey. They experience something, and I like it when they can be mean or not always likable.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello there. And so in that regard, could you also explain about how you worked with Vicky together? Because this is her first acting experience, from what I understand. So how did you both create this character together on set, especially?
Yes, she was not an acid attack victim. but she was in a fire as a child. So we spoke a lot about each other, with each other, what her experiences were, and what she went through. That she contacted a lot of doctors to help her. That she was bullied a lot. And at first, I looked at her and I thought, like, I don't understand that you are bullied, because to me you're beautiful, or I really didn't get it. But hanging out with her and going to the pool with her and seeing like people staring at her constantly, I understood.
Oh,
sorry.
Number 2. No, it's perfectly fine. Please. Okay, so perhaps in that regard, I'd also like to ask you again, because the film traveled a lot, and the kind of audience reactions that you received throughout the film's travel throughout the world. What did people say? What did the audience say?
Well, Vicky traveled a lot with me, and I think a lot of people reacted extremely positive to her and to her story, and for her braveness to. I mean, she was a woman who hid her body, who hid everything. On days she did not come out of her house. To be completely naked in front of the camera as well, and to show her scars to the rest of the world, that was so brave. And so to me, I learned a lot from her as well, doing all the Q&As together. That wil je alsjeblieft dit nog nemen?
Ik kan zelf die kleine blazen.
Okay, so.
Well, at least you're good at creating very likable children.
Definitely. Yeah, and okay, and my last question regarding the film, before I move on to some general questions, again, I wanted to ask you as well. Did you have was it a struggle to make the film? Finding funds, the financial part of it, or was it perhaps easier? I don't know, because it was your film.
It's what I'm sort of used to now, creating to finance a film with. I mean, this was a film with Ireland, the UK, Belgium, and the Netherlands. So it was with a lot of support from a lot of funds, and so it was. I mean, it was not easy, but it went step for step, and it took a long time, and it was for me the first time to make a film with the BFI and the BBC. So we were not sure if we would ever if they would finance us, but in the end they did. And it was not. I think they don't look at the script and say, "Oh, this person is not likable," or you can't make this. So no, it was not so difficult.
Great to know. So now I think we can move on to a bit more general questions that I'd like to ask all of you, actually. But I will start with Sacha Gertsik, because she is also a development executive. She works with many people. And Sacha, you were also one of the dramaturgs of the TV show Anna Plus, I believe, which follows a female character through Amsterdam. So basically, the first thing I wanted to ask all of you was, do you think, over the past, let's say, 10 to 15 years, has the filmic landscape really changed in terms of representation of female characters, in general? And this includes, the number of leading females, but also, the depth of these characters. Do you think there has been a shift towards the better? And I'm really especially curious about this because you all, also come from a country which is very high on the gender equality scale and is, supportive to equality, especially, in the arts. So I was curious what you thought of in this regard. has there been positive changes, or perhaps it's still, I don't know, still the same? Sacha, would you like to begin?
Yeah, well, maybe it's good to begin with the fact that actually, statistically, we don't know. There's never been a study done in the Netherlands regarding gender equality in front and behind the camera, both for film and TV. I work in both, so yeah, we don't know. We think in Holland we're doing well, but actually I'm part of a group of people, Vrouwen in Beeld, who are trying to initiate a study into this. So if we're truthful, the answer is I have no clue. I do think that as a woman, or maybe just as a person working in film and TV in the Netherlands, I do think it's getting better in the ways the world is getting better at gender equality. I don't want to generalize. It's so different for many places in the world, but I do think that in general, at least we're getting some more words to describe things that weren't as equal before, but and they're still not equal, but at least we know how to name them. And when we start to name things, we get better at depicting them, and then trying to depict alternatives to them. And I hope that's how we come to, well, and not to sound too sappy, but to a better world, maybe, by depicting alternatives to how things are now. But are we, I mean, we're never done, obviously. And I think we are starting to do that. And both female and male directors are starting to do that. But if you ask me, we're definitely not there yet. No.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, again, with this question, actually, Carice, I'd like to ask you, because you as an actress, you must be getting a lot of screenplays, and you must be reading a lot of the material that's out there. Do you sense a shift in the writing of female characters? Do you believe there's a better quality of maybe perhaps writers out there, or people who want to write about complicated women?
Yes, I do. I mean, I recently read something written by a woman that was really great, but that was an exception still. I do. I mean, I don't know if it has to do with my career of the last sort of 7 years, but I tend to be, I tend to get the standard stern, strong, religious bitch characters coming my way. Which, that's just a bit of typecasting, I think, which I completely don't understand. I mean, I understand it from a point of view of casting people and people that know me from a big show, but for myself, it feels always a bit weird. But I guess at least female writers get more chances, and so it will come up more. It's just I see better parts on TV shows. Personally, I'm still in that sort of I have to plow through cliches a bit. But some, it's so wonderful when then actually there is something that's really layered and exciting. Yeah. So I agree with Sacha. We're definitely not there yet, but the more opportunities there are for women, the more they will come.
Yeah. Absolutely, that's great to hear. And Halina, what do you think about this? Do you agree with Carice and Sacha? Do you think things are a bit more better?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think things are getting better, and no, I think I see a lot of female writers. What Carice is saying, getting chances, and I do feel that when we started, for instance, our TV show to create that 8 years ago, it was pretty hard to get across what we wanted. And they all said, well, you cannot do this, and you cannot have a female character that doesn't like her children, and you cannot have this, and you cannot have that. And then after the Me Too movement, we saw a significant shift in all the men that were producing this show. that they suddenly were like, oh, females, this is hip and happening, let's do it. So I mean, you do find that it's also sort of fashion wave, but I'm riding that wave because that's the reason I'm here in America. It's because they just think anything female, just let's say yes to that. So yeah, no, I think there's a shift, but there's still a lot more work to do. Definitely. Yeah.
Thank you for your answer. And Sacha Polak, would you also agree? But by the way, it's important to remind that Sacha's all three films have very strong female characters, and you've been Sacha, you've been on this determined path of presenting the female voice for some time now. So how do you think things have changed when you first started out your career as a director, and now, for example, do you find it easier to tell your stories?
No, I've never the scale of films that I have made were not huge or anything. So within the Netherlands, I've always felt really supported, and not that there was a lack of female directors or female stories. I do feel the shift, of course, internationally, that an appetite for female directors. So that's also very good for me. I'm enjoying that, and there's like a lot more opportunities.
Yeah, great to know. And then moving on to my next question, Sacha Gertsik, I'd also like to start with you again. And this is a question about let's say the development process and the storytelling process. What I'm curious about is, for one of the big debates right now, actually, I think in many, creative places, is that the usual, let's say, Aristotelian way of telling a story, the 3-act structure, or, maybe the hero's journey, how really appropriate is this for female characters, or are these methods and, these ways of storytelling easier for male heroes? So I was wondering, do you think maybe there's also a shift in the storytelling of especially when exploring female characters? And are you, for example, having these debates in your circles because you're especially in the development part of the process?
Yeah, that's interesting that you come at it that way. I've never thought about it as a technical plot problem, structure problem. I think I've always thought that we're just not used to seeing female characters go through a hero's journey. I mean, all of these terms are in some way arbitrary, right? The structures that we call them, whatever. So we're just not used to seeing female characters in that space. And I don't talk about that in those terms, though. Usually what I talk about, the writers and the producers I work with, we talk more about the place of the female character in the plot. Like, is she truly being, is she truly in the center of the story? Is she still not a function of one of the male characters, for example? Or are you really making her complex? Are you really rethinking the position of a female character in a story? And I mean, like, we have a few ideas about what strong female characters are that we've kind of gotten used to. For example, there's the female cop, or there's the female doctor, and we've gotten a little bit better at seeing females in those roles in our films and series. But I think we can still, I find myself asking a lot of questions about the position of the characters in the stories. And obviously that also involves structure, but I think that the main thing is to rethink what a female character is, because we're just so used to the female character being a function of the male character's ego, basically. That's why we understand romantic leads. That's why we have many more examples of female protagonists in romantic comedies, for example, because we understand that, like the flailing woman in love, we get it. That's how we see woman. We can do that, right? But like, I don't know, a female, like, can you imagine a female Sopranos? We still haven't, right? Or I don't know. I think that sometimes we get this glimpse of how we could develop female characters. Often the movie Juno comes to mind, because that's to me such a brilliant example of subverting all stereotypes. Like we think of teenage pregnant girls as like being stupid and their parents being not supportive, or and like the father of the child not being in the picture. And that movie gloriously subverted all kinds of stereotype. And even above that, it's still a comedy. And I think that if we get better at that we'll figure out the structure at some point. But the structure comes with the characters and with the story.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a perfect answer. I mean, it answers, because there's still, so much to explore in that sense. It's not like there's a great pathway of, so it's still, I think a lot of people are still exploring, many things about, developing female characters. Yes.
Yeah. Well, maybe there's one thing I should add, and I don't mean to sound negatively, but I mean, the industry is still very much male driven, right? Both in the States as in Europe. And I mean, obviously there's brilliant female financiers and brilliant female producers, but often we find ourselves, at least I've often in my career found myself answering to men. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but that does mean we need more time and more words to explain some experiences that are less known. And maybe Carice and Halina, I mean, I think everyone understands this, but maybe Carice and Halina relate to this process in some way. What you just mentioned, like when the male execs and producers around you kind of turned after the Me Too movement and started to see your story of Red Light, your series, in a new light. I also recognize that, but that also means that we as female professionals in this industry still often have to take some more time to explain things and some more words. And thankfully we have more words now, but still that's also, to me, that's an important part of the process to not erase. I want to kind of keep talking about it so it gets better. Also, that part gets better.
Yeah, so there's still a lot of educating to do, perhaps also in that regard, for let's say decision makers. But so in that regard, moving on to my next question. For example, you've all have already arrived at a certain point in your careers. And for example, from now on, what is it? What does your inner compass tell you when you're choosing a project? And for example, the kind of women I want to write, the kind of women I want to act. What kind of, right now at this point, what kind of selection process and do you have, like with your no's and your yeses and do nots and do's? Perhaps Halina, we can start with you on this one. Your sound is gone.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. For me, it's important that you, of course, relate to the story in general. This can also be a story about a giraffe, but if you don't relate to it, then and then secondly, I would definitely say that I'm very much I am purely attracted to female-driven films, but that can also be because it's about a woman or because it's about the story's about a woman, or it's it's written by a woman, or there's a very strong female producer involved, or something like that. And I'm also very aware of the fact that we as white women also have a privilege, So I'm also attracted to projects that are more inclusive and also about sexual identity that go further than just a straight white female. For me personally, so those are things I'm reacting to if I get a script.
Okay, that's great to
For
know.
me,
Yes.
I feel the same when it's connected to a woman. I wake up more because I feel in fact I feel when something male comes to me, I sort of can't help but feel a bit like he's not going to get it. It's just all of a sudden I've allowed myself to think like that. And also because I've enjoyed it so much to work with Halina in particular. I mean, I've worked with more female directors, but when you get a taste of showing something different, then it's so hard to go back to the cliche and to the obvious, to the obvious role. And so I'm not a man hater, but I do tend to think twice when I get a male script. I'm like, oh, here we go again. It's just I feel really like it's over now. Let's get on with the women now. I it's a bit black and white, but I really tend to react at the moment like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's completely understandable. And Sacha Polak, well, how do you feel about this as well? What is your selection criteria? What kind of projects do you want to be involved with, apart from your own projects? Because I think you're also directing a TV show right now, or did I read that wrong? Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Well, to me, it's either, it's sort of like falling in love, I think. You find something in the project that is important to you at that moment, or that you're drawn to, and I can't really explain what that is, and it doesn't necessarily has to be a story with a female lead or anything. Although I've done like 3 female leads, and everybody's always asking me why do you do that? And then I always think like, would you also ask the same question to a man? Probably not. But besides that, I mean, it needs to be something that challenges me, either in what I can do, but it doesn't necessarily need to be with a female lead now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And
I hope that Sacha will.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Oh. I hope that
Please go
Sacha
on.
will direct. Okay, my dream is that Sacha will direct Carice at one point. That would be, I think, an ultimate combination of fireworks.
Yes, please.
This is just a side thought that I'm having right now.
I think that's great. Sacha, we can't hear you.
So fast forward to the Oscars in 3 years, and the new film by Sacha Polak with Carice in the lead is nominated for Best Foreign Film, and everybody's like, yeah, there was this panel at the Istanbul Film Festival, and that's how it happened.
Exactly.
Yeah, that would be great. And for example, what would be your advice to, let's say, a lot of young female filmmakers, or young scriptwriters, women directors? What would be your advice to them, especially who are just starting out their career? And because I remember in my time, when we were all starting out, it was, yes, it's still a very male-oriented landscape, but things were a bit worse. And now I think there's a lot more room for younger women, to come into this industry. But still, there's a lot of, it's still a big jungle. So, what would be your advice to, younger women who are, trying to make it in this business, let's say?
Sacha, I think you should answer this. You're much more experienced. We are babies.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's very boring and cliche, but it's just trust in your own instincts and yourself. I mean, I'm very intuitive as a director, but it's taking me time and experience to trust myself and don't think that my own voice is stupid or anything or not important. So that is something that I've learned, and yeah, I trust myself and my own instinct much more than I used to. So I think that's my main advice, is just I think everybody's voice is important, and it's only interesting if it's your own, and if you can make something that is new or yeah. If it follows your own instinct.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm taking this
anybody
advice.
else?
I'm taking it. I know. I'm taking that advice from her. I need that advice right now. So I think that's a great advice. I mean, that's exactly it, that, and especially for women, and now maybe I'm saying something sketchy, but especially for women, that's often not so easy because we are not conditioned that way. We're not conditioned to think, my idea is great, and I'm just we're always like, yeah, but what if, and maybe that person is right, and if that person is very dominant, then maybe I should listen, and to trust that voice in yourself, I think that's the hardest, and that's the best advice that that we as women can get from somebody like Sacha, who has so much experience and has made such wonderful films.
I remember also working with a female director once, and she actually said she had a good idea, and then we shot it a certain way, and then I think she was sort of overtaken by a man. And she was sort of listening to him, and then it didn't work out. And then I heard her say, "I should have listened to my own instinct. I should have listened to it." So I see that so much still. I mean, in my daily life, but also in my own life and in work situations, on set where I bring up this idea, and all these men are just, they don't listen to me, and then 10 minutes later they come up with the same idea, and then all of a sudden it's brilliant. It's. Yeah, it's just so boring.
Yeah, unfortunately we've all been there. Sacha, Gertsik, I think you'd like to say something.
Well,
no.
First of all, I guess that we've definitely all been there. I at some point I was working at a broadcast, and I developed a technique with my lovely male colleague. That I would say something, and then the boss would dismiss it, and then he would repeat it, and then we would go with that idea, and it worked every single time. It was a standing kind of thing we did. But also, if I have much less experience than all these wonderful women in the room, but I want to say that my biggest advice would be is to listen to your own instinct, and then find your tribe that will listen with you. To find these colleagues, to find first, I don't know, I think for most of you it was work that way, to find fellow women or fellow feminists that understand what is important to you and why that should be brought to the forefront, and then kind of back each other, because that's what a tribe does. For me, that tribe has mostly consisted of women of my own generation in the industry, and a few kind of elders that I've learned a lot from, and many feminists of every gender and color. And that I'm more hopeful the past few years about the industry, because I feel like the feminists are coming out of the woodwork. That allows us to tell much more complex and interesting stories. So yeah, find your people.
Yeah, absolutely, great advice. So now let's come to the last small part of our panel. We have some questions. We have a few questions from our audiences. I'm just going to check now. We have a question from a Zeliha Doğan, who asks all of you, in order to make films, women scriptwriters, directors, producers have to try harder. How do you think these challenges can be overcome? I guess it's a very difficult question in a way. But perhaps
I'm not sure if I
do any of
understood it.
I think
Wat zei je, Kar? Je moet ze herhalen.
I said I'm not sure if I completely understood the question, to be honest.
From what I understand, she's trying to ask how to, if it's possible to jump all the hurdles that women face, and
as a
how
woman.
to jump these hurdles. Yes, as a woman.
I think
and
what,
how to
what
overcome
helps.
these.
Yeah, I think what helps sometimes is to, without being too angry or aggressive, that I always am. Carice can witness this. To be very in a loving way. Just say it. Just say like, well, I have the feeling that since I'm a woman, that or that this theme, since I'm a woman, it might not, or and that really helps. It opens up the discussion, because men also, as we said before, need to be educated as well. You know, they are conditioned to just think from their own, identity, and that's always been the norm. You know, straight white male. So you cannot judge them too much that they are not completely open. So I think it always really helps that I'm like, if I get this sort of setback where I'm like, why can I not do this, and then I just now learn that it helps best to just explain it and really call it out, and not just be like, oh, but maybe my idea is bad. So maybe that's advice. I don't know. It's also, of course, very different in every country and every film fund and all of that.
But nevertheless, I think that's great advice. If anyone else would like to pitch in, perhaps, or no? Okay. Sorry. Well, I'm just coming to our next question. Okay, so we have a small, let's say, provocative question from Yasmin C. Rams, who asks the question for both films. She asks, there are strong female characters in both films, but she says, I feel that men of color are vilified in both films in this way, and she wonders about the male character in both films, and if you believe there's a vilification of these male characters.
Well, I understand the question.
Sacha Polak.
Go.
Oh, sorry. No, I think in my film it's not it's actually the case. I think the role of Naz actually helps Jade a lot, and I think in Dirty God all characters are flawed in some sort of way, and they're not all good. And the men are also not all good. There's one man, there's also another man at the office who's very not so nice to Jade. And of course her ex is also not so nice, but she also still longs for her ex. So that's in the dream. So I think it's layered in that sense. And I think Naz is a complex character, as he really loves Jade and is attracted to her and still sort of longs for her. He also doesn't go for her. So I think it's not, you cannot say it's all men are vilified in the film, but I think everybody is sort of, besides for the children, everybody is sort of flawed in a way.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that goes for our characters too. I think Nicoline is more damaged than Idris. So Nicoline is the female character. In the end, she is more dangerous, more damaged, and she almost uses her power. And she uses him in a way. He literally says that, and he's right. So I think and in all art, I think, especially art house films, there's never good and evil. If there's always good and evil within every character. So for me, they're both very damaged, and we show that in both of them. And they're both very round characters, and they get a lot of screen time to express that. So I feel the same, but I find it a very interesting question, and I don't mind the question at all. And I think it's very important that we all learn and wake up also as far as racism and our conditioned thinking in that way. So I really appreciate the question.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you both for your answers. And coming to another question from Terry Eskenazi. this is the quote. Do you think positive discrimination should be applied to women, such as women film festivals, the differentiation of Best Actor or Best Actress awards? So perhaps Sacha Gertsik, maybe you'd like to lead the question on this one. But Sacha is not here.
I think she froze. I think she's frozen.
Yes.
In time.
Okay. Would anyone else like to pitch in about this?
Well, I don't think positive.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there she is. Well, I don't think positive. It should just be equal, and I think that right now it's not equal. So if you need to make a correction, then we need to make a correction.
Yeah.
This goes for females, but also for race and all of that. You know, you see it now happening with a lot of big American awards. The Golden Globes, there was no person of color in that whole academy. You know, none. So of course that needs to change. So if you call that positive discrimination, I would just call it making a correction so that things become normal again, you know, or normal for the first time. So this, I don't know, I don't really understand the discussion. I see it that's going on about the female and male awards, but I don't understand what is going on with that. Like, I don't understand the whole issue. But I do understand that females, we should get equal rights. Sorry, go ahead.
I know I once won the award for best female director, and it did feel a bit like, oh yeah, this is the invalid director or something, or this is the award. So I mean, yeah, that didn't feel so good, to be honest.
Yeah, it should just be best director. Period. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, and coming to our last question, which is from Esma Şimşek, and this is a very difficult question. She asks, how do we build layered female characters? How do we create characters that have different layers and complicated women? So it's a very difficult question, but perhaps if each one of you could give your own answer to this last question, that would be great. How do we do? How do we create?
I think it's I think it was Sacha pointed out. I think if an interesting character, whether male, female, animal, whatever, it should be layered and it should have flaws. You know, it should have good sides and bad sides. That's what makes it interesting. It should have interesting dilemmas, and that's how I see it. And again, unfortunately, this has been, you know, in the history of time, has been a lot of times men. And now we make the correction, and we can also create a lot of female characters that are like that. But male characters still need to be like that as well. Still also need to have all these layers and flaws and elements. And so that's that's my opinion on it.
Yeah, and look deep within, and look at the dark sides and at things that we don't want to talk about in general. You know, to bring that forward and to make them relatable and discussable. Things that we normally don't touch upon. I think that's what at least attracts me.
Great. No, that's a great answer. And Sacha Polak, what do you think?
I think a lot of it has already been discussed. I don't know if I have anything to add to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Nevertheless, and Sacha Gertsik, maybe you'd like to add a final dose as the development person in the room.
Well, I think it's what we've all said, kind of over and over again. Make them the protagonist of their own story, and make them active in their own story. And then they will be interesting to watch. And then we will learn as a society that women are as multi-layered as men, and we will start treating them as such. And that's a really big thing to learn for all of us, I think. So
that's true.
Don't take it
yet it's
lightly.
very simple.
Yes, but also all of us are so conditioned. So, I mean, be kind with yourself, but also keep asking the difficult questions so we can get to the difficult, interesting characters that we all, the funny thing is we all know them because we are them. So if we share ourselves and the woman we know in our lives, I think we will get there. It's just a question of kind of persevering and keeping at it.
Yes, thank you so much. So we have arrived at the end of our panel. Thank you so much, all of you, for your time. It was a long panel, but I think it was great. We discussed a lot of subjects. We were honest, and I think it was a really good experience also for our audiences. So I'd like to close this panel, and thank you so much to all of you. And hopefully when the pandemic is over, maybe you can all come to have the Istanbul Film Festival in better times.
That would be so nice.
Yes,
And thank you for your excellent leading this conversation in a beautiful way.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you all.
Thank you
Good evening. İyi akşamlar. It's an honor to have this opportunity to be here with you today, even if it must be virtual. I would like to thank you all and Ike Save for giving us the opportunity to support one of our most important goals, empowering women. Each of you represents how determination, will, and desire motivates women to overcome great adversity to be successful. For this, I greatly admire you all. Turkey has many prominent women and rising stars in the film sector, and this program is an excellent example of cultural exchange between the women of the film industry in both of our countries. Just last week, we had the opportunity to meet with some of these prominent women in the industry, and we were very impressed by their talent and determination. In addition to supporting women's empowerment, it's also a goal of ours to support the Turkish and U.S. film industries, for we have much to learn from one another. Once again, it's my great pleasure to be here, and I wish you all great success. Çok teşekkürler. Thank you.
Hello. Microphone matters as usual. Welcome to our panel on creating strong female characters for films and series. This is the last panel of the day. Good evening to those who are listening to us in Istanbul, in Turkey, and good morning to most of our participants out in the US with a great time difference, but joining us. So thank you for being here. We have an amazing panel today. This panel was organized, as we've heard, with the support of the US Consulate General, and we're trying to focus on creating authentic, strong, compelling female characters who can inspire women and change the perception of women by the society. And we have 5 participants today. A great variety of positions and backgrounds and approaches, but a wonderful, great feminist group of women who I'm sure have a lot to share. And I'm very honored to be the moderator here today. So let me first introduce everyone very briefly, and then we will start our discussion. And we have enough time for questions as well. So if you want to ask any questions listening to us, you can type that into the chat section next to the screen on YouTube. And I will be receiving those questions and I can direct them to the participants. Let me start with Jennifer Kushner, who's an industry development consultant. She's an experienced program director, story development executive, and strategist with international expertise in artist support, mentorship, and diversity and inclusion initiatives. She's currently the industry development consultant with Australians in Film. Previously, she was the director of artist development at Film Independent, a leading nonprofit arts organization based in Los Angeles. There, she's over a decade, she championed and cultivated the careers of hundreds of emerging visual storytellers. She was also instrumental in the creation of Global Media Makers, a cultural exchange program that fosters relationships between American and international film professionals, in which she developed initiatives for filmmakers from across the Arab world and Turkey. We also have 3 filmmakers, writers, and I'll introduce them next. We'll start with Debra Granik. She's a New York City-based independent film and documentary director and screenwriter, and she's known for her feature films, starting with Down to the Bone, starring Vera Farmiga, Winter's Bone from 2010, which I'm sure a lot of our viewers must have seen, which was Jennifer Lawrence's breakout performance as well. And that for that film, Granik was nominated for Academy Award for Best Picture and Best Adapted Screenplay. And in 2018, she made Leave No Trace, based on a book by Peter Rock. And she also makes documentary films, so we can look at a variety of subjects. Aurora Guerrero was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area by Mexican immigrant parents. Early in her career, she co-founded Women Image Makers, a queer Chicana-identified film collective based out of Los Angeles. While with WIM, she directed short films, and her work earned her a slot on Filmmakers magazine's 25 Faces to Watch. She wrote and directed Mosquita y Marie, her debut narrative feature film, which premiered at the 2012 Sundance Film Festival. The film then went to travel top-tier film festivals, including San Francisco, Melbourne, Göteborg, Guadalajara, and won multiple awards. In 2017, Guerrero directed her first episode of television on Ava DuVernay's critically acclaimed drama Queen Sugar. And since then, she's directed on Greenleaf, The Red Line, Gentified, Little America, 13 Reasons Why, Cherish the Day, Blind Spotting, and Mr. Corman. So a lot of different narratives. Our third filmmaker and scriptwriter is Iram Parveen Bilal, and she's very excited to tell thought-provoking stories that are socially impactful and envision an inclusive world. She was raised in Nigeria and Pakistan and spent a third of her life in 3 different continents. Being a serial fish out of water, I'm quoting her bio, which I love, she has a keen eye into characters coping with challenging circumstances. Most recently, she was hired to write a pilot and break series for 2 seasons of a hip-hop dance drama by the Emmy Award-winning producers of Netflix India's Delhi Crime. Her second feature as a writer-director, I'll Meet You There, was in competition at South by Southwest 2020 and has opened to the North American market to rave reviews. She is also an active mentor for women in film and tech, and she was raised to be an engineer, but then came into filmmaking. And she's a member of the Film Fatales and the Alliance of Women Directors advocating for gender parity behind the camera. Our final panelist is a programmer. Dilcia Barrera is a film and series programmer for the Sundance Film Festival. For over a decade, she's worked for film festivals, including a tenure as programming director at Lelif, senior programmer at AFI Fest, and has collaborated with programming teams at Outfest and the Los Angeles Film Festivals. Most recently, she was LACMA's film curator and was invited to curate 2 new shorts categories for the New York Film Festival. So we have panelists, as I said, from different parts of filmmaking, consultants, filmmakers, programmers, so we can look at production, financing, distribution, exhibition. We'll talk about all these different aspects of filmmaking in terms of presenting strong and believable and real female characters. And the issue of gender representation, especially female representation, has been central to feminist film theory for decades, and it's been an integral part of debates in filmmaking and film industries in the last decade or so. So I'd like to just start with a short round of what you personally define as a strong, believable, true female character. Do you have any role models that you would want to mention maybe, or maybe give examples from your own work, just sort of to get us started talking a little bit. And on here, I have Aurora to my right, I guess, on the screen. So let's start with Aurora, and then we'll go sort of clockwise and get your answers.
Yeah, I'll bounce around. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for having me be a part of this panel. Appreciate it. What constitutes a strong female character for me? Honestly, it's always started with a female character that moves away from any stereotypes that have existed and that I have been exposed to. This, and very specifically for me, are women of color, particularly Latinx women. And, you know, the stereotypes of Latinx women tend to be overly sexualized. They're portrayed as dead. They're, you know, they're wives. They're always in service of the male narrative. You know, just very one-dimensional. And so for me, it's always been the strong female characters have always sort of revolved around the women that I grew up with, because the women that I grew up with never were like the women that I saw on screen. The women I grew up with were, you know, life didn't happen to them. Like if that's the women that I belong to, I probably wouldn't be here. Like they were always, you know, making shit happen because they had to. And they were always very complicated. You know, I had a grandmother who was a staunch Catholic, but she also drank and told dirty jokes and had boyfriends, you know, like it was just very complicated, interesting, funny, smart women who, unlike the victims that I saw on screen, you know, had some sort of say in their lives. And so for me, that's always where I start. I start from the women that I know. And I think that's what is exciting to me, is building female characters that feel complicated, that are layered, that represent the intersection of being a person of color in the US, coming from a working class background, being queer identified, which I identify as such. And what does life look like for a woman who embodies these realities? So, you know, it's just so rare to find those depictions. And so for me, it's, you know, it's not difficult to write a strong female character because of the reasons that I just mentioned. I just know a lot, and so I always draw from the personal.
Thank you. Debra?
Well, it's hard to add a lot to that. It's a very rich kind of list and ways of thinking that you've just put out. But I think there were a couple phrases I've always used to myself, or when we talk like this, is which is 360, right? Like that we know very well that certain attributes of female characters have been highlighted over time. And so what else do we not see? So if you look at someone who's fully developed, who does this, and this, and it's the and, I think you were talking about the unexpected, you know, that that your grandmother has all these qualities that you might, that might be very expected of a grandmother, and there was all this unexpected quality. You know, that I think something that comes to mind is solving things. You know, that's the opposite of passivity or victim or conforming. So I think I do think that in the stories that I'm attracted to, where women are central, they're solving something. They're pushing life around. They're altering their circumstances or those around them. They're striving for something, solving something. They're not appendages. They're not ancillary. They're not, as we said, connected to a male protagonist only. That's not their only function in the story. So I would say highly active, full of ands, and that you're curious what they're thinking. You know, it's not their looks that you're just wondering about or attracted to or following. It's what's inside their head that you're seeking to latch onto and be attracted to.
Thank you. Iram, anything to add to that?
I hope I'm not going to always be following Debra Granik. No. I agree. You guys have already laid out what comes to me, and you kind of hit on that, Debra. I think for me, my whiplash reaction has always been having a character where beauty is not the only trait, where it's okay, or externally defined beauty. So you're not arm candy, or, you have agency. I mean, a character that has agency in making their decisions, like Aurora said, is complex, conflicted. And just, I think in terms of, I don't really believe in characters whose decision making is kind of not at all in their strength and in their agency. And so I think if you start from having the agency, and for a lot of people, I think, going back to what Aurora said as well, expectations, right? Because sadly, we have seen less strong female characters in the age we live in than we would like. So for the most part, I would say when you're writing and creating, the first thing is like, is this what I've always seen? What have I not seen? Because there's so much world that's unseen for women on screen. So you have just a plethora of choices. And in every choice, it's okay. And by the way, strong doesn't mean that they're not vulnerable. It just means that they're fully human. So give them the honor as they are human beings to be human beings on screen. Be strong and weak and beautiful and not beautiful, whatever, just whole 360. So just echoing in different words.
My initial reaction when I saw the strong female characters headline was like, do we have to be strong? What does that mean? But yeah, strong yet vulnerable, layered. Jen, what would you like to add to that as a consultant and so as someone who reads a lot of scripts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have a lot of work to do as a culture that tells stories, and we live in a patriarchal society, and we have been for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so these stories, these models we've seen, and we've internalized them. And so there's work to do in subverting it. And I think you've brought up really interesting points, everybody, about what does it mean to be strong? And what strength has been presented as is very much in like a masculine paradigm of of power, of sometimes violence and control, but there's other kinds of strength. And I think looking at how do we tell stories that show other kinds of strength is exciting, and seeing stories about people and female characters who don't necessarily operate in that kind of binary is exciting. And to see characters that have real goals, and like you've said, that have a real dream of life that's fresh and that's authentic to that character, and that they take action in the story that isn't, a lot of times I think female characters are protected and they end up not getting to take the key action in the story. Like somebody sweeps in and saves the day at the climax of the movie, and that character is robbed of that transformational journey to really go through the full journey. So I think, we have to do a lot of work at looking more closely at what we're doing to our female characters, and really letting them make the difficult choices, and letting their humanity be fully revealed through the story.
Thank you. Dilcia?
Yeah, I like that you talked about the title of the program, Strong Female Characters, because when approached with this, I didn't think of, strength as in muscle or even actual pushing, but actually as a whole, as a person that is a whole, that has more than one line, that is layered, multidimensional, that is authentic and pushing boundaries, everything that was already mentioned, but most importantly, not being a cipher or a vessel for others.
to me is a point that is really important. But obviously, to me, what Aurora mentioned is in terms of pulling from the personal, people around you, from the real, is what I look for when watching projects, whether they're series or films. But I invite everyone to watch the movies of the women that are on this panel, because they're all not only great examples of what we're talking about, but actually inspiring for personal journeys. So I'm really looking forward to keeping to explore this a little bit further, because I think everyone up here has great points that the audience can take from.
Thank you. So maybe turning to the filmmakers in the group, as you're developing your characters, how do you go about building, and you all have female characters in the center of your narratives. How do you work with the actress, for example? You do some of the work writing and preparing, and then you have to give life to that character, I guess, collaborating with the actresses. How do you go about doing that? Maybe talk a little bit about the more practical side of things. And this time, let's start with you, Iram, so that you're not following Debra this time.
I think that the word that keeps coming up to me, and the word that is very lacking, I think, when in terms of treatment of women, not just in film, is respect. And I think respect and honor of their intellect, their emotional intelligence. I feel like there's a lot of, conversation about the beauty of the woman. But like Jen said, the strength of character. And so I extend that to my actresses, which is that when they read the script, I'm just listening to their reaction. I'm just listening to where I can film more. Because for me, casting is half directing. So once I have my lead and it's an incredible, strong actor, I will just listen to her and listen to her ideas. And then when she asks for direction, and then I will talk about, what is the best way that she wants to be directed. And then we come up with a game plan, just like you said, we collaborate. And we also understand that a script is a living and breathing document, not just as a scriptwriter, but also just the fact that we're all in lived experiences, and what might have been true 2 days ago might not be true anymore. Maybe we have more learnings and wisdom in life that happen in 48 hours. So it's extremely collaborative and extremely fluid up until it is lensed. And of course, in the editing room as well, right? So I still have, I'm very good friends with all my leads and my actors in general, but I still, like my latest film, like we sign off the phone with love you to each other, because there's this sort of mother and child or sibling or whatever bond that is formed. And I'm like that with all my actors, male, female, gender, by any, so I would say that. I also wanted to say, just towards the previous question, to people that might not have the sort of rich lived experience like a lot of us in terms of having those strong female role models around them, I think we all have mothers. And I think if we start from just how our mothers are away from the pressures of society and how they have been with us, that is your base point. So when you're writing a character, would you feel comfortable if your mother was portrayed that way? For example, I'm just saying in terms of the depth of decision making. That is a starting point, but I will let the other fabulous women speak.
Debra?
Yeah, I think, of course, I think one of the maybe sea changes in directing attitudes, was when women entered the field, was a little less top down. It wasn't the dude with the megaphone sitting in the big chair, or the cherry picker lift with the big dolly seat, screaming or having someone else scream his orders. And I think it wasn't exactly the sort of Lars von Trier, abuse your people, make them cry a lot, have women weep throughout most of the film. And, it was a little different And you can't generalize. But I just mean, I think new images of what it means to coordinate a film, started to emerge. So I really appreciate the idea of this, that the actor's going to come with a lot already. They've read. The reason that the actor said yes and you said yes was because they've read the material. They've either read the novel that it was based on, or they've read the screenplay in depth. They've read some of the articles that influenced you. They've shared a lot of information and background with you in order to get ready for the film, and therefore they're going to bring a whole lot from some parts of them. And I love to be ready for that and really open for that to enter into the script and into the story. And I think I'll just give one little lyrical story, just tiny story. As I was getting ready for working with the actress that did the teen woman in Leave No Trace, I had read this really cool essay online by a woman college student who was writing about The Tempest. It was, I don't know how, it was so arbitrary. I was looking for images of The Tempest, what drawings had been made in the past about this dad and his daughter that were marooned in a secluded situation. And this young feminist college student wrote this very lovely analysis, beautiful analysis about Miranda, and the daughter, and so where are your inspirations of what you might transmit? So I passed this essay along to the actor, and I think it was just this excellent foundation for looking at this story that Western people are steeped in, Shakespeare being in the canon, and just a way to interpret that story that makes you realize that Miranda is doing a heck of a lot to propel that story if you look at it in a different way. And so that was a good example for me of being able to give this nugget of something really thought-provoking to the actor. And she really responded. And I think it ended up being something really rich that we brought into the process.
Thank you. Aurora, how about you?
Yeah, so when I got into filmmaking, I had no idea how a director worked with actors. My background was in community organizing, and we all, in the work that I was doing, we all decided to use a camera to tell stories and to jump into narrative filmmaking. And we just employed a lot of the tools we use as organizers, which was really working in community and being collaborative and exercising, listening to each other, thinking about whose story is this? What privilege do I bring to the table? Am I from this community? Am I not? Should I listen? Should I bring more to the story? And so those were dynamics that we thought about. And within those dynamics, we created stories very collaboratively. And so when I started to look at the Academy Awards, for example, I started to see how the director in particular was really highlighted as the maker of this film. It didn't quite click because I was coming from a space where I understood very clearly, regardless of the politics that I had and the way we worked, that it took a community of artists to tell the story. And so I was like, how is it that this director is getting all this hoopla acclaim when there's a team around them and everybody's bringing themselves and their lived experiences and their talents to be able to tell this story? And so I was like, well, that feels very hierarchical and very capitalist. And I didn't want to do that. And so I just brought that from my back to the way I work with people. and my team. And actors are part of this community of artists that are trying to tell the story. And so, so I'm very open. I'm very, I don't come in claiming to be the authority in this story unless it is very, very, very much my story. then I'm very, you know, I know where it's coming from. But for example, like in Mosquita y Mari, my film, I was coming into a community, although Latinx, it was not my community. I did not grow up in Southeast Los Angeles, and I didn't know what it meant to be a young girl in this particular barrio community, very working class. And so I had written a script that was based on my love story, but it was San Francisco. And I immediately knew that I needed to be in conversation with young girls about what it meant to be young in Southeast LA. And so when I came into this community, it was like putting ego aside, very much like there's so much knowledge that you young people have that I don't have at that point I was 30, I don't know what. And I'm humbled by that, and I am excited by what you all are living today, and I want to find a way to incorporate that in the story that I'm building. And will you help be a story builder with me? And these were the conversations I had with these young people. And none of my actors really had any experience acting. And so I never was like, oh, you're behind the 8 ball. You're screwed. Like, I know so much more. I was like, I'm not an actor. We can figure this out together. And so, always in constant conversation, always creating an environment where folks feel like their voice is valid and that they will be seen and heard. And those are things that I have learned to do. Were reaffirmed in the making of Mosquita y Mari, and that those are effective ways to work with actors and the rest of your team, really. And I feel like it just makes the story and the film so much stronger and better and rooted in truth and honesty and respect and all these values that are important to me. Seep into the film and the final product, because that's the environment and that's how we work together. And so that's how I approach any person I work with. And thus far it's been good, at least in the film world. In the TV world, it's a different conversation, because in the positions that I've been in, I haven't necessarily always been in a position of power per se, to be able to say, this is the way I want to run it. But even then, I talk to actors, and I'm very, like I said, just very open and very articulate about the way I work, and that I'm there to grow with them and to tell a story together. So that's how I approach working with actors and my team in general.
Thank you. It's wonderful to hear these different stories of collaboration and camaraderie and sort of equal positioning between different parties, sort of suggesting a different way of filmmaking and a different way of thinking about stories. And maybe I should do a little disclaimer and tell our viewers that we had a small meeting beforehand to talk about issues that we would like to discuss, and some things came up. So I'd like to bring back one of the things we briefly talked about, how, as has been already mentioned, it's been centuries, if not millennia, of patriarchy, and there's this claim that there are no new stories and everything has been told, which is sort of like the baseline of postmodernism, etc. Everything is recycled and so on. And this idea came up that yes, maybe the stories have always been there, but maybe there are alternative aspects of these existing stories, parts of the stories that have not been told, the alternatives and the female aspect and so on. And I was wondering what you think about that, and maybe this time I'll start with Jen.
Thinking about what to say. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's really rich. I mean, I think it's really rich to go back to the stories that we know that are like almost these archetypal stories that we live with, and really look at them and how can we get underneath them when there's maybe characters, and maybe oftentimes female characters, that are not the protagonists of these stories. And how do we retell the story with them as the protagonist? Taking, mythological stories or biblical stories and then reinterpreting them, or even just, last year's superhero movie. I mean, I think we're seeing more of that, where it's like, well, what if we just flip the script and make it a woman, And I think that can be very effective in a lot of ways. You suddenly have a very active protagonist, but they're existing in a really, I think, a very typically masculine story. And I think it's a fascinating thing to look at. And how can we unearth the humanity of these other characters and these other facets of life that have been underrepresented, if not invisible, in our cinematic culture in a lot of ways. So that's my thought.
I was reminded of that also because Debra mentioned looking at The Tempest again from a different point of view. So that's why I wanted to go back to that. Dilcia, any comments?
Yeah, I think most of the time, creators, filmmakers, artists are motivated by the fact that they haven't seen themselves in these mediums, whether it's TV, film, even art. And so the obsession with creating something new and different can drive people. But there is something to say about, there's also the obsession of not being part of a space and wanting to juice that space and almost create like a spec or another version of it. To me is very interesting and innovative within itself, and something that I also look for within the films that we're watching. And I think oftentimes when it's done in a right way, and right way is not even a right way to say it, in a new, exciting way, it becomes better than the original story in some senses, because it gives you new perspective. And that to me is exciting within itself and challenging for people that are creating. But I do believe that is, there's two ways to approach it, and either way is really is really motivating for artists. So I wasn't part of the conversation earlier, but I'm excited to hear more about what people were mentioning with this topic.
Yeah, we didn't get to explore it that much. That's why I wanted to come back to it. Aurora, maybe you want to add anything to that? I'm just gonna, if you want to say something, raise your hand and I'll give the word to you. If not, we can skip. Debra.
I was thinking about there may be not news stories, but as people are pointing out in the panel, parts of the story that just didn't get told or are on this, what we would call on the sidelines, but much quieter, maybe less conventional stakes. But I was thinking recently of this year's film by Eliza Hittman, called, I might be botching the order of the title because it's a complex title, Sometimes, Maybe, Always, Never. And that relates to a form, an intake form at a reproductive rights clinic. And what struck me about her film, and I ended up writing this message to her, was here we have all these men on the pulpit debating about the laws that pertain to women's bodies, right? And, and this has been a feminist discussion for decades now, and it always involves sort of like the lawmakers or the men that run the country screaming the loudest, who can be at that pulpit thumping the loudest. And her story was so much in the interstitial space where they can't go, where they can't even be, where they can't feel, where they can't think. And she told the story without them. And I thought that was so kind of audacious and interesting. And it was because it was such a small story. It was like 48 hours or 1 week in this teen woman's life. And the whole plot and the stakes were conducted with the assistance of her best friend and other women practitioners. And they just pushed life forward despite the men yelling and screaming and making their restrictive laws and getting up in their business. They just navigated around them and got things accomplished. And I don't mean just like it's easy. I just mean, what I mean is there were no men, not because it was a fantasy, not because it was a story about Amazon heroes or people on a Greek island where there are no men. It was they just needed space and time to kind of tunnel through around all the no's of the patriarchy. And this is a contemporary film. So it's like, to me, it was very eye-opening to say, okay, well, maybe in these 26 narratives that the entire world knows, one of them is during the millennium of patriarchy, one of them is that men have demonstrated that they always seem very invested and obsessed with controlling women's bodies. And here she just did this small, quiet story where two women deviate.
Ram, anything you want to add to that?
I was just going to say that it actually makes me angry when people say all the stories have been told. Because it's like, who said all the stories have been told? We just started telling our stories. Maybe the white male stories were told, And I guess that is usually said in the sense that, okay, they're, in the sense of the hero's journey or, But again, first of all, maybe all those stories are stale. And now we're in a new woke world where we need retelling of those stories. And also, we will never have enough stories because we as humanity are evolving, and every day our perspectives are evolving. So don't listen to people who say all stories have been told. Go out and tell your story, because your story has not been told. You are a new individual who did not exist before. So that's it. People are interested in you. And how do you make that relatable is just be as specific and authentic as possible. So no, I say no to people who say, I don't see a story about a strong Pakistani woman out there that everybody knows about. No, they don't. So those stories have not been told. That's all I was going to say.
I also, just to jump off of that, I also really hate when I meet, programmers or executives who are like, you told that story and we don't, there's no room to tell that story anymore. Like, it's been told. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like one little brown girl in a sea of brown girls that have had a multitude of experiences around love and desire and growing up. And I have just chipped at that iceberg. No, don't make me the voice. You know what I mean? Like, no, I refuse to be that voice, because there is no one voice in our communities. That's dangerous. So I think that we definitely need to nip that in the bud, for sure.
Yeah, the burden of representation, as if, that's the only, as if, there haven't been many tales and stories and films about the male hero who goes on a journey, as we've just said, which I think kind of brings us to maybe the position and the role of gatekeepers, both in terms of financing and in terms of getting these films to be distributed and seen. And let's look at that a little bit. And we also have people in these gatekeeping positions here. Let's look at all three stages in terms of financing and distribution and exhibition. And I know, Iram, you had mentioned something about criticism as well, if I'm not mistaken, in our earlier meeting, and I'd love you to touch upon that as well. Maybe let's start with Jen again, as someone who is in one of these positions. And maybe the filmmakers can also share their stories about, Debra, when you said it's a small film, and it's never, rarely, sometimes, always, by the way, I just looked it up.
Okay.
Do these stories end up being told only as small films because that's how they get financed? Or is there a way of subverting the system to tell bigger, in terms of at least budget, have these stories be told, like getting these female superhero movies, etc. So it's kind of all over the place, but let's look at how these films get made. Can they get made, and how do they get distributed, starting with Jen?
Well, that is a very big question. I think, yeah, it's an interesting topic. It's an interesting, just for a minute to break apart, what is a small story and what is a big story. I mean, I think that's such an interesting area to discuss. And sometimes, it takes a small story to make a big statement. I think that there can be really powerful things conveyed through very quiet, intimate stories where the journey is small, in that it's more like you said, Debra. I mean, that film is very contained, and yet it's a huge journey that they go on within this very small period of time, just a few, these two girls. And so, but, a lot of times we're talking about budget when we're saying big and small. And that does in a lot of ways correlate to marketing and to audience and to the kind of exposure that a film is going to get. And there's just so many touch points along the way. I mean, I think it's a really, talking about just from the beginning, from development, who's getting in the room, who's getting greenlit, who's making those decisions. I mean, we've had so many conversations about this in our industry now, but I mean, who's in the room and who resonates with the story and who decides to say yes has so much to do with, we have implicit bias. We gravitate towards things that we see ourselves in. So we have to diversify the decision makers as much as the storytellers. It's so important, but it's also about waking up to the realities of the market. I mean, we have underserved audiences. I mean, like Aurora is saying, like to see herself reflected in the stories, and how there was a dearth of that. There was just not seeing it. How important it is, and when it's there, people flock to see these stories that resonate with them. And we have billions of people, in the world, and storytelling is becoming increasingly global. So there is incredible opportunity to open the doors and to tell different kinds of stories. But yeah, the problems of, systemic blocks along the way is very entrenched, and there's a lot of, I said it before, but there's a lot of work to be done at multiple points along the way. And I think, it takes champions, in seats of power and in gatekeeping positions to wake up and to bring more people to the table to make decisions, to not have so many lonely onlys in the room, and be more inclusive and have more people greenlighting with what interests them, but also with recognition of what is actually commercially viable. I mean, there's so much misconception about that, and people just have ridiculous ideas. Well, a story about African American people don't do well commercially overseas, but it's just not based on fact. It's based on racism. I mean, it's based on it's unfounded risk aversion that's not based in anything proven. So, and there's been case after case of stories about women, stories about people of color that are traveling, that are captivating global audiences. So it's really time for people to have an open mind, and I think it is changing. So,
Debra, what would you add to that as a filmmaker in terms of getting your films financed and made?
Well, I think you picked up on the word that I used. I used the word small when I was describing a film that I thought was really strong, and I think even interrogating the word small, right? There's a bunch of people who have never gotten to really put in the center position this concept that small can be beautiful, small is good, right? Like people, one of the first dilemmas, I'm old enough now that one of the first dilemmas was, we don't know what to do with a micro budget. What do you mean you want to spend less money? That's not impressive. We don't know how to get financing for something so small. But small means maybe you don't use cranes. Maybe you don't have hordes of trucks. Maybe you don't generate tons of garbage. Maybe you don't have a crew that's 90 or 100 or 400 people. Small doesn't mean that the impact has to be small or that the story has to be small. I mean, to me, it wasn't small. After 4 years of seeing these jowls of these right-wing men oppressing us here, and I think in many other countries around the world, to see Eliza not even have one of those men. Everything that these two women needed to get accomplished was accomplished by them, and they didn't have to I didn't have to be exposed. So it was small only in that it was very streamlined and very efficient and smart, and it didn't need any special effects. It didn't need expensive things to be made. But its strategy wasn't small. All the other things weren't small. So I'm just saying small is an interesting, loaded, charged topic or descriptor, because we might think small is really good, whereas in the commercial sense, as Jennifer's pointing out, there's this very big anxiety about not being able to scale it up, globalize it, have it dominate every screen. Well, whatever happened to some of the other parables, ways of thinking, or sayings? If your film doesn't cost so much, you don't owe so many people, right? If what you borrowed to make your film isn't so vast, you're not so beholden to so many people that you owe to. That's one interesting thing that gets lost in the discussion about big and small. And the other is, what about niche audiences? What about not needing to appeal to the entire planet at all times? why is that considered, art house directors and art house runners and art house programmers have had to ask us to look into that. What does it mean to have a couple beautiful, meaningful screenings at an art house, even if your film will never be deemed commercial enough to be disseminated globally, or, why do we have this kind of priority hierarchy where we just assume the most massive thing is the best, or is the biggest achievement, or the most accomplishment? So I'm just trying to be, it's like from the 70s, right? It was a global movement, I think a lot of European feminists were really helming this one, like small is beautiful, but without that being just an empty saying. How to make a living then, if when in the small paradigm is that's another set of questions that have to be really answered. And I just think that that's something we want to keep in the discussion. Who claims, who's defining, as Jennifer said, who's defining what is commercial? And are there other plots besides big violence, big threat, big stakes that are commercial?
I actually want to turn to Aurora and Iram for that, having experience in series and Netflix, working with those new platforms, which, as Jen mentioned, storytelling, obviously it's always been filmmaking, has always been very international, always globalized, but now it's even more so through these online platforms. And, anything that gets made somewhere is now available at the same time at 100 other countries. So maybe also thinking about that side of things and what your experience is in terms of getting your, telling your stories, but also working with these platforms and producers working, creating content for these platforms. How do you put, what you value into these narratives, and do you see any restrictions in terms of what you can and cannot create? Let's start with Iram, maybe.
I think that for sure, in terms of series, Aurora has way more experience than me, so I will not be talking about series. I did want to, because I've self-distributed some of my work, I do want to talk about sort of the forces that we are up against. And it's interesting you talk about, so we have to recognize, like Jen said, that we live in a patriarchal world. So why are words like small and soft and vulnerable considered weak? Because they are defined in that context by a world that serves patriarchy, right? So it isn't a coincidence that a film that when they use the word small as if it's weak. I also want to reframe and highlight something that Debra said, which is commercial to me. And I've said this from my first features distribution, because in Pakistan, we were releasing it in this really big film, apparently. This Bollywood ripoff film was released, and that was called commercial, and my film was called art house, even though my per-screen averages were higher than that film. And so I said, well, if commercial is from commerce and making money, my film is more commercial than this film. So I have often said that maybe instead of aggregate box office, we should talk about per-screen averages when we talk about success of films. Because here's what we're up against. We're up against systemic sexism, patriarchy, systemic racism, coupled with capitalism, right? So this notion that that most efficient amount of profit, right? Which is why the niche stories are, because it's like, let's just do one shot and make like whatever, $100 million, right? As opposed to let's empower 10 storytellers and then make that too, because then that's way more effort. We have less profit. So capitalism is obviously the reason I feel that the smaller budget is kind of going away. The other reason is, like Jen said, the African-American film, the brown films, they will not put the same amount of marketing. So they don't give it a chance of success. So they're like, okay, you want to do this film? Go. Oh, see, you didn't do that well. Well, yes, but that's unfair. you need to give it the same shot, you know? So I will give you a story from filmmaking, from the indie filmmaking side of things, with the word small, which really drives me nuts, which is exactly like Jen said, tried to fund this film, the South by film, with the system, with agencies. It was too small. Why? Because the white characters weren't the main big characters. They were brown film like actors. There was no named. The words that are used are so defiling. These are no name actors. And I'm like, excuse me, my actors have names. Why did you start saying no name? What defines name? Oh, here's what defines a name. The amount of box office they made. Well, okay, so systemically, you never gave them a big role enough. So now they don't have a name for you. So now they can never have a name. So I have to go out and take a risk, or she has to go out and like launch big female superstars. So that's that, right? So then they don't fund you. Then you go away and you try and raise money on your own, and you make a film that's actually decent for half the budget. And then you go back to these distributors and they're like, oh, it's so beautiful, but it's just too small for us. And I'm like, well, if you funded it in the first place, it wouldn't be this small, you know? So you see, I'm just trying to give you a window into the system and the cycle of oppression. So these films work. They work for the audiences. They work absolutely. And that is why they live, right? But the problem is that they are not allowed in the mainstream for very obvious reasons. Because what we're talking about here is, as we've said, media is power, media is thinking, media ends up leading towards politics. All of this is intertwined. So this isn't a coincidence that the loudspeaker is controlled by other people. So even if you make content that's incredible, if it's blocked before the loudspeaker of distribution, how many people know it existed? And there's an onslaught and tsunami of content, and there goes your like 5 years of work, right? So this is the picture that you are up against, telling, you know, sort of stories about niche communities, telling stories about female filmmakers. So Aurora, you can do the series. I'm so not the series, but I have so much passion on the distribution side of things. And I also wanted to say the critics side of things, right? Because, so, oh, you don't have enough stuff. This is a small film. Then you may not get into all those, and all respect to you, Dilcia, I'm not saying this, but like there are some A-list festival. There is a whole thing, you know, there's a whole system. And it is nothing against these festivals that are trying to do their best, because there's so much material. There needs to be 10 of them, right? How can they justify for everybody, for all those incredible, talented filmmakers? And then you're not out there. And then because a lot of the critics are also white males, so they don't, again, we talk about implicit bias, they don't necessarily see, you know, the same sort of value in your films. And we know that at Sundance, for example, if a critic just cuts your film, it affects your sale price, right? These things are legitimate issues. It isn't coincidence that Rotten Tomatoes brings in all these inclusive people of color critics, and all these people of color films become more fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. And now audiences are seeing that, oh, it's fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, let me watch it. So these are consequences. These people in power, these gatekeepers know what they're doing, right? I mean, you can keep me going for distribution. Anyway, thank you.
Drop the mic, for real.
Aurora?
Yeah, it's so complicated. It's so complicated. Yeah. So on the TV side, I'm relatively new to the TV side, and I've come into the TV space as a director and have been hired as a director on these shows. And so that right now, that's my lens. Like, I haven't launched a show as a creator. But being in this television space, and working a lot, thankfully, I feel super blessed. What I have noticed is that there are more creators of color, and content that to me is exciting and has a voice that feels fresh and grounded and three-dimensional. So that to me is exciting, and it's another platform. I feel like it's another platform for me to potentially. Sorry, my kid is. Okay, baby. Ya está bien. Sorry. So I'm seeing this, and this is exciting for me because prior to getting into the TV space, I was in the indie space, and I still feel like I want to be in that space because you have so much more say in your stuff. But I was really struggling with getting my second feature off the ground, even though my first feature was, by all means, a success story. It made way more money than most people imagined it would, had an audience, won awards, all that kind of stuff. And I struggled to make my second feature for all the reasons that everybody is stating, that I wasn't centering certain people, the fear that it was too risky of a financial investment. Will there be the same stuff, which is, as we've all talked about, very problematic and keeps storytellers like myself from being able to keep telling my stories. So in the TV space, what I am seeing is a wave of filmmakers like myself who are telling their stories via a different platform. And I do feel, even though I've been in as a director, that there is a possibility that I could come in and tell my own stories because people are asking me, executives are like, what do you have? We're interested in the stories that you want to tell. But I haven't gone out and pitched, and I haven't been in that situation where I can say that I have sold or what that experience was like. So I can't say, but I can only imagine that some of the same things that are in play in the film space are also in play in the television space. Because the television industry was built off the same building blocks of upholding white supremacy and patriarchy. I mean, it's no different, right? The TV space has changed because the business model has changed, and there's more money to be made, and more audiences, diverse audiences, are flocking these platforms, and so people are more open. But I still feel like the structure that I just mentioned is what the TV space was built off of, and so it's the same stuff. But I feel like there's some hope there. And that also, the hope comes from like executives of color who are opening up doors. I always tell my friends, like, Ava DuVernay was so smart to take Queen Sugar to Oprah because Oprah gets her and she's got her network, and she let Ava basically do what she wanted. And I tell my friends, where's our Oprah? Where's our brown Oprah? We need a brown Oprah, to be able to tell the stories that we want to tell the way we want to tell them. And so, I think I'm going off track. But anyways, that's my experience in the TV world, my thoughts.
Thank you. And Dilcia, as someone who is in one of these positions, getting the films to the audiences, to the festivals, choosing both films and series, what would you like to add?
I mean, I work for a place that I think is a huge brand, and a lot of people on this panel have touched and been touched by. And what I can say is my own personal experience from the beginning is I've been uplifted and hired exclusively by women and women of color. And so I don't think that's a coincidence of how we should and should continue to have each other's back, per se. Continuing to hire women and women of color teams, and not only in your teams, but in roles that are directors or leadership roles that actually have a say in what's going on. And once you have a room or a space full of these women, is actually listening to them, and women of color, obviously listening to what they have to say. Not, we're not just a number. We're not just someone to claim or sit there, but actually listen to what we're saying. And more than that is also being flexible within the organization and molding as the times change. And a big example of that is the series section that we have at Sundance. It's only about 4 years old. It's something that we developed. I mean, it started, by showing something like Top of the Lake by an established filmmaker like Jane Campion. But we realized that there's people that are creating pilots or small episodes. They were using YouTube and other forms of social media to show these stories. So why can't we be a place where people can launch those? And we've had some success stories, including Work in Progress. Abby Methaneni is the story, of this queer woman of a certain age. And when you pitch it, maybe some people wouldn't have paid attention, but it played at Sundance in the series section, and it was picked up by Showtime, and is now, has an entire season that you can now watch on Amazon. So being flexible and being able to take advantage of the growth and these spaces to give people opportunities is definitely something that I take seriously, and definitely something that I understand and am accountable for. What I get to is the other side, which is now passing the baton. I feel like this is a marathon. I'm now running, and someone needs to take the executive side needs to take the baton and run, needs to buy these movies, needs to give these people deals. And that's the part where, I totally agree with Aurora. More women and people of color in these leadership and money roles would definitely make a huge difference. But obviously from our side, I take it very seriously and continue to push forward my own people that look like me, women, and encourage them as much as possible. And there's always going to be opportunities to do so. Not only like hiring a job, but taking a meeting, taking a call. Someone wants to, just talk about their career. Why not? It's, 15 minutes, half an hour. Even you never know what these chats or conversations could lead to. Not only in inspiring, but actually actual palpable opportunities for people.
Yeah, I think it's very important that I guess all of you seem to be also taking on mentorship roles, because it is very significant to see someone who is already doing this. Without seeing it, how do you know you can become it? There's a better saying for that, which eludes me right now. I have one more question, then we'll take questions from the audience, because we already have a few. Maybe giving a few specific examples about audience reactions to these films, that either the films that you've made or things that Dilcia, you've experienced at the festivals, or Jen with the projects that you've been involved with. What's the audience reaction? We've mentioned there is definitely a niche audience. Is there anything that surprised you in terms of the audience reaction? And do you think the perception of the people can be indeed changed positively by these films? And this time, let's start with Debra.
All right. Well, I would say, let me start with something just very broad, and maybe it's retro. And we spoke actually in our little our sort of powwow before about an incident that I remember well, and I actually thought was very hopeful ultimately, right? Which was the idea that many of us have been instilled with this notion that that a lot of times a popularity of a female character would be absolutely directly tied to sort of her sexuality and all these things we've talked about this morning about, or today, about what makes a woman appealing on screen to a wider audience. And I made a film in which the protagonist does not remove any of her clothes. She just stays dressed during the whole film, basically. And the idea was, oh my God, boys won't be interested. They won't care about her. They won't even relate to her. They won't even bother to look, because she's, there's not this expectation of sexual content. And it wasn't true, it proved not to be true, that so many boys that were the same age as the protagonist were interested in her because of what she was doing and thinking. And so I like that, because it gave me a lot of positive feelings, like, oh my God, we've sold people short. We've made a lot of assumptions based on, and this was before algorithms, right? Or before algorithms were used all the time. It was just certain people saying so. So I love, you never get tired. That's a big part of feminism, right? It was a big part of feminism in every arena was, oh, it feels really good to hear a story about someone I can relate to. It feels really good. I'm enjoying this. And then, feminists are 360 degrees, right? So something else I wanted to say was that sometimes a woman director might be bringing out some attributes about a male character that aren't also that are kind of lobbed off. And so I remember feeling an unexpected positive reinforcement that when I heard from people who had participated in military combat, that they felt that in two of the films that I had worked on, that either in the documentary, the character got to say a lot of things that hadn't maybe always been spoken about. And then in the narrative, which was very inspired by some of those things that I learned in this long conversation with this veteran, ended up being in the narrative film. And, so of course it feels very wildly reinforcing to get messages, notes, texts, feedback from someone who says, I really felt very understood. This character reflects a lot of some things I'm going through in my life, So I think I guess I want to say it's unexpected when you realize that even though you've not, people might think you're in a box. There are ways that the audience you can't make just unlimited assumptions about who's going to respond. Jen?
So I was just thinking about Nomadland, and Chloe Zhao was her first film. Songs My Brothers Taught Me, when it was in development, was called Lee, and it went through a screenwriting lab at Film Independent where I was working at the time. And I'm really proud of like seeing her journey as a filmmaker. And that film, Nomadland, came to mind because that is a film like we're talking about that you might say is a small story in some ways. But it is it's a story about a woman who is late in life, who's facing retirement. It's a story about, big questions about what our values are and how we treat older people in our society. And my mom watched that film twice. She watched it 2 days in a row. I was like, I can't believe my mother watched this film twice in a row. I just think, that movie stands out to me now, and the fact that she's nominated and the film was nominated for so many awards. I'm not like, I don't think awards are everything, but it does speak to a receptivity in audiences for these kinds of stories that are powerful, that are talking about what's happening in our world right now, and it centers a female narrative, and and it's by a woman of color, and it's I think it's hopeful, and I think it's really important that we're telling stories that are meaningful and that reach out to audiences. So my 71-year-old mother can watch something 2 nights in a row and feel deeply moved and feel like she's seeing herself on screens. She's seeing what the things that she's facing in life are represented. And so yeah, I think I think things are changing, and I think there is space for many kinds of stories, and I think there is excitement and interest and passion for new kinds of narratives that we haven't seen over and over again.
Sarah? You were nodding very enthusiastically, so I wanted to ask you.
Because I agree with everything that's being said here. And I want to acknowledge, and I'm sure there's a lot of male filmmakers watching, there's a very important role that men can play in this inclusive, strong, well-rounded female character world. You see, the dream is that no matter the gender and the color of the hero on screen, we champion them, right? That is the dream that we all relate with whoever is on screen. And in some ways, what we are saying, that we resonate with what we see on screen and representation matters, is true. But I dare to question if it is so true because we have been left out for centuries, because we haven't seen ourselves. Maybe if there was a well-rounded representation from day zero, we would all connect with everything up on screen, right? So I just say this to say that it is important, I think, no matter who, and again, Debra, you said something about like women also directing male characters, right? And writing and directing male characters. It is just important, I think, to honor and respect humanity in whoever you put up on screen, whether that's male, female, queer, old, disabled, person of color, because if we try and make them 360, if we try them and make them human, we will connect because we're all human. And I think the problems start coming and the challenges start coming when we try and strip away humanity, when we try and box perception, right? So what is happening to me in some ways is a whiplash reaction of thousands of years of patriarchy, which is why we feel this need that only if we have women and women of color are we going to be able to like tell our stories. But what a beautiful world it could be if no matter who's in power, we are giving all of us a chance. And what about thinking about culture of plenty and saying if we create as many stories and as many outlets, we can all have a way to our audiences. And hopefully the ultimate dream is that audiences intersect. You know, how I have grown up watching white male heroes and feeling and crying for their journey, how I would love that like a white male sitting in Ohio on a farm would watch a Pakistani woman's story and cry and feel for her. That would be the dream, you know? But yeah, no, it's a good discussion. I've got a lot of light bulbs, so thank you for the inspiration.
Aurora, would you like to add anything? This actually will get back to this a little bit. Maybe let me also introduce one of the first audience questions because it relates to what you said. Can Kiremitçi asked about creating genderless characters and what the importance of being able to create genderless characters, and whether this kind of an approach to write characters without a specific gender would make room for female presence in the industry. And giving the example of Alien, where Sigourney Weaver's character initially was not written as a woman, just space hero. So maybe taking that note into consideration as well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I did not know that Sigourney Weaver's character was not originally written, or if there was any specificity to gender to her character, which is really awesome. And I think that is definitely a place to start. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I'm the right person to answer this question, or if anyone else has something to say. But I mean, for me, that's an approach and a theory that could help. But I just feel like, I don't know, that there's a certain level of consciousness that you need to start with. Like, I feel like people, I mean, you could start with trying to strip everything you know about what women are supposed to be or men supposed to be, and just write. But that stripping of how you understand men and women is a process. I feel like it's a process of dismantling the things you've been taught and you've learned that women are supposed to be and men are supposed to be. And that there's a lot of self-reflection that comes into that. In terms of coming to those places and not perpetuating these ideas that you've been taught. And so, I don't know, I feel like I would start there in understanding, what have I learned from society about women and how I am meant to understand them, and doing that personal work and breaking down those biases that you have. So you have a consciousness around it, and it's not just like, oh, it's just easy. Let's just strip them of anything and let's just start from ground zero. I just think that it has to come with a consciousness about, what is patriarchy? How did we get here? What is my role if I'm a male writing a female character? Should I be the one writing it? Should I be in partnership with a woman? Should I be listening to them as I'm building this character? I personally am from that school, because I think that only makes you a better person in the world, a better citizen in the world. And from that, you can write amazing characters. So I don't know. That would be my approach.
And as to the previous question about the audience and any experiences that you've had that were surprising in the audience's reaction to your films?
Yeah, I mean, with my feature film, with Mosquita y Mari, in trying to get it financed, as many of my fellow panelists brought up, I was told that there would be no audience, that it's a niche audience. And a part of me was sort of like, and I don't care. Like, I want to be in conversation with young brown girls. They never get to be in conversation with filmmakers or with film. So I'm okay with this. And I sort of like, I limited even myself in terms of the capacity that my story had to impact other people. And so when I ventured out with my film and I got to travel the world with it, I was surprised when men would stand up in the audience, and these were men from different cultures, but I was particularly shocked when white men would stand up emotional and tell me that that was their story. And I was like, wow, you know what I mean? Like, it just affirmed that I do know that stories have the capacity to cross audiences and touch all kinds of people. And, I'm telling a story that's very specific in terms of place and maybe language, and specificity with some cultural elements, but I'm telling a story of love. and we all, or a crushed out story. And a lot of us have those stories. And this person was like, I appreciated the specificity, and it was and I could still hang on to it, and I saw myself in it, and it moved me. And thank you for telling my story, because I had never told it. And so I was affirmed in terms of the power and capacity that a story like mine could have, and how it could travel. And so that was wonderful. And I keep writing the stories that I want to write, knowing that that it can cross boundaries and borders, and to not listen to the hoopla, the powers that be that say that my story cannot cross over. So that's a specific experience I had, and I will always hold on to that.
Dilcia, any experiences you've had as a programmer, to see the reaction to the films that maybe you chose and thought, or had questions about whether it would actually meet with the audience?
I mean, I'm in a great and very fortunate position that I get to stand on stage and present world premieres to films. And so to receive the standing ovation next to some of these filmmakers, has brought tears to my eyes. And it's well known that I'm crying on stage often. But I think, I want to give the audience the almost the power that to know that their audience voting is really important. An audience award is huge and can lead to a deal for a filmmaker. So if you love a movie, you should vote and vote high for it. If you love a movie, you should tweet about it, because it could lead to also, getting attention from an executive, or like Iram brought up the idea that sometimes there's critics usually get assigned to pieces way before the films come out. So it's oftentimes that a male or a white male is being assigned to a film, and their perspective is different than your own. So if you have a different perspective, tweet it out loud, say it, and make noise about it, because there's been so many situations where a tweet can lead to a deal or an attention that wasn't there previously. But also buying tickets in the first weekend that a film comes out, that's another form of audience voicing, and that can even lead to an extension, a longer run of the film playing. But also, to me, I really love the community screenings. I know, we've talked about the world stage and festivals like, Sundance, Cannes, Toronto, but there's a extremely powerful and beautiful connection when doing these community screenings, and whether it's with a small organization or a museum, etc. There's just so much that is bared at those moments, and that you connect with people, because it takes you out of the bubble that we're in of film festivals and in the indie world, and it takes you into real world with real people, and connecting these stories, whether they're commercial or art house. I really love those reactions with community screenings, smaller film festivals. So I think audience does have a lot of power and a lot of voice in terms of what happens to films. And Mosquita Mari is a great example in a film that I still am surprised when another Latinx brown person has not seen it. To me, it's just like, I wish you were at that first screening. I wish you were at that screening at like Plaza de la Raza downtown, because I think people will have their own journey finding these films. But I do believe in the power of audience, and these smaller ways of showing your love for film.
Mm-hmm. Do I have time to share an audience reaction? I forgot to share one. Very quick.
Please.
Very quick.
Yeah. I was going to say,
to me,
that experience of sharing films with an audience, even though it gives us a chance to be here today and talk via Zoom. But yeah, that's something else.
My first feature was inspired by this woman who runs these food kitchens in Pakistan. She was one of the stories. And when our film was released, this fan in Australia asked me for permission to use the film for a fundraiser. And it was just happening in the slew of things. And I said yes. And 6 weeks passed, or 2 months passed by. And then I was in Pakistan for the theatrical premiere of my film. And I hope I don't cry telling the story, but 2 days before the premiere, I got a call from the woman who runs the food kitchens. And she said that we got a donation to supply 45 families for the entire month of Ramadan food. And I want you to come and give those bags out. And this was in a remote town that was very kind of dangerous at that time. And my mom was like, "You're not going." And I'm like, this film is inspired by this woman. This has happened. How can I not go? And I think that's the power of film. I went there and we were in this like little storage house, and these zinc shutters went up, and there was a line of women, veiled women, who didn't care who I was, who didn't know, like, why should they? They were there to get these bags of flour to feed their babies. And I had written these words in a cafe in Pasadena, California, that was going to feed these children for a month. That is the power of film. Somebody felt the message of the film. We had an action campaign tied to our film. I always do. And here I was. And I mean, that premiere was like so diluted and faded away compared to this moment. And I still cherish it, you know? And I just wanted to share that. It was pretty incredible.
Thank you. That is pretty incredible. Anything you or Debra want to add to the genderless characters question? We actually have a couple of more questions and are coming to the end of our session. So if you don't have anything.
It's a totally rich experiment. I mean, my God, you know, just to take away the gender. I mean, it's, you know, I kind of think that we're not quite there yet, but it's definitely a worthwhile experiment to do. And, you know, there's a lot of pirate stories, a lot of cowboy stories that, you know, you wouldn't know who the gender is. A lot of people that in history that represented differently than the gender they were assigned, that we don't know about, or that we do know about, that did very important things all throughout history to shake it up. So it's an incredibly rich area. And I think it'll be a very exciting next part of the century for us to be completely deploying that. And whoever wrote that question should be, you know, I hope will gather a big storm to make that happen, you know, and there'll be a whole bunch of screenwriters that don't specify the gender. And yeah, who says Odysseus was a man? You know, all these, you know, who said all these pirates were dudes? You know, what? It's good. It's really good to culture jam and try something new, because we've all agreed that it's a little tiring what we've been through last 45,000 years.
Yeah, and I mean, I would argue that that movie's better because Sigourney Weaver is in that role. I mean, I don't know what originally Ripley, I guess, was conceived as a man, but I mean, I don't know whether you can say it's a genderless character now. I mean, it's Sigourney Weaver in the role, but I think it's fascinating to not, you know, let's think about women characters, not that their motivation, their goals are not necessarily always because of their baby or because of some kind of like traumatic sexual trauma that they've had in their lives. I mean, like, you know, I think some of it is kind of falling into, maybe it's not about making characters genderless, although I think that's very interesting, but like, let's not fall into the same tropes of what are the goals and motivations of the female characters, and give them, you know, it's okay to have a woman want to just kick ass and save the world. I mean, and without it being because of, you know, her oppression necessarily, or maybe it is, but yeah. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. We actually have 3 outstanding questions in about 10 minutes. So I'm going to try to combine these questions in a way. 2 of them are quite similar. Esma Şimşek writes, how can we get rid of the negative traces that patriarchal society brings to the cinema, which is a huge question, but maybe combine that with Ali Rıza Bayezid's question of what would you suggest to write strong female characters more acceptable in a patriarchal society, sort of possibly subverting and sneaking in, perhaps, or maybe other strategies. And Burcu Kıran has asked what you would recommend to a young woman who would like to break into the film industry, since you also have mentorship roles. So maybe a few words to wrap up from each of you about possible alternatives to, for these female characters. And of course, the whole panel was about this, but maybe a few closing words and a few suggestions, recommendations for young women who want to break into the industry. And whoever would like to go first, since this is the last round. Debra.
I really got excited by the question about what could we do in a very patriarchal context to make women on screen liked, not just liked because they're nice, but appreciated and not rejected, not what's it called, where you sort of just have a negative reaction. And I think it has to do with how the men in the film respect her, right? So I was just thinking about, men in the film can respect the sovereignty of her body, right? Like no violation. Men in the film can pass the mic to her, right? In a meeting, in a scene of a boardroom, or it doesn't have to be that she's always neglected or can't talk, but that they want to hear what she says, in the context of the story. That they rely on her. They rely on her to solve things. That they need her. They need her. She's indispensable. She's not like, you don't just leave her behind. Like if you got to go on this mission, you don't just leave her because she's just cooking for the guys. She's indispensable to something that's happening on screen. So I feel like if the guys in the film like and appreciate her and respect her, I think there's a really good turnout that the people watching the film, even if they're wildly patriarchal, the modeling is that these dudes on screen like her. I like her, if she's smart, like the man's, like if there's a man in the audience and the young woman is like her, like his daughter, and the father is shown respecting his daughter on screen, the father's going to like that dude, I think, and he's going to also really remember about how rich and gorgeous it is to see this father on screen respecting his daughter. And I was thinking about a Palestinian film I really liked a couple years ago where that played out, where what the daughter was doing was not considered socially acceptable, but the dad understood his daughter. And what got represented on screen was this patriarchal man with the ability to shut his daughter down or punish her or to understand her. He chose to understand her. So that to me, and they're living under a difficult rule-based patriarchy. But so to me, what an incredible way to change culture is, the setup can be as patriarchal as it has to be, given that we can't change everything all at once. But in that, the men on screen make different choices. And I'm just saying it's a starting place, A
great starting place.
I was going to add to that, Debra. That's so smart that you articulated it. Once you articulated it, I was like, aha. But, also as someone who's making films in Pakistan, which has a very also probably explicitly patriarchal setup like Turkey, it is absolutely in the storytelling and the scripting. I think that is extremely smart. I also think it is in how you present and market the film. Sometimes you kind of have to bait and switch, in the sense that you can't, I feel like just having a super rebellious trailer and everything getting banned is not really going to help. I think that in some ways you kind of have to bring the people to the audience, to the theater, and then give the, sugar-coated pill. It also, I would just throw in there, is like perhaps having male allies in the social media world and in the marketing world, like, big stars that people look up to. I don't know, the guy who plays Ertugrul, who's a massive sensation. People who are also not only the characters in the film who are supporting the strong women, but real life heroes that are exalted by these patriarchal societies are also chiming in ahead of the release and saying, this is a film I'm excited about. This is what I want to watch. To the women who want to be filmmakers, just because something hasn't been done before doesn't mean you can't do it. Because the setup was always to make sure that, a lot of ideas you have might not, should not necessarily survive. So don't be discouraged. When people say things like, oh, that's never been done before, don't be discouraged, be excited. Be like, oh, that's a new opportunity. And then another thing I would say is that no are just two letters in negotiate, because you will hear a lot of no. And no doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just means you need to look elsewhere for better champions, build champions for yourselves, and make films. Make films to make films. Don't wait for somebody else to give you a chance. Make it on your iPhone, make it a scene. Just keep making films. Because the world out there, if you're going to wait for somebody to greenlight you, that is not going to happen for a while. I hope it does, but I don't. In my experience, it hasn't. So,
right. No one's going to give you freedom. You have to take it. Right. That's the old adage. Yeah.
I would also add to not do it alone. I think for me, finding a community of other women filmmakers or even male allies has always been my foundation and my life support that has kept me going through the years to this day. That those spaces are what give me new life, new perspective. And so I would really encourage that, because doing this alone is very difficult.
So well said. And we forget that one of the outcomes of us working hard on feminism for a lot of decades is there are a lot of feminist males. I mean, genuine men who want to be allies, like you've just pointed out. And I think that's really crucial. And, that was also one of the sayings, right? When things get better for any group, vulnerable group, any group, they get better for all. So I think a lot of men really, that really permeated their socialization over time, really meaningfully.
I can just speak to mentorship a little bit, because a lot of what I've done in my career is create opportunities for mentorship and a little advice. And so I think that absolutely, as an emerging filmmaker, or really any filmmaker, mentorship is important, and finding people that believe in you. I think there's a little bit of sometimes a fairy tale idea about mentorship, like I'm going to find a mentor and they're going to just, help me and open doors for me, and it often doesn't work that way. I think it takes a lot of it's a two-way street, So as you're seeking out a mentor, really show up prepared, know what you want out of the mentorship, have specific questions, know a lot about your mentor, and stay in touch, express gratitude for what they've offered, show that you've taken the notes or the advice that they've given and that you've actually thought about it and processed it, and then come back, with, okay, here's what I've here's the work that I've done, and come back with new questions and new goals that you can bring to the mentor. And I've seen so often that these relationships are, when they last, it's because both people are showing up for the relationship, and oftentimes it's as beneficial to the mentor as it is to the mentee, and sometimes these end up becoming collaborations and are mutually inspiring. So, but I do think it's really important. I would encourage you to apply to programs, but not always to rely on programs, that you can seek it out by getting involved in a community of filmmakers and storytellers. And like Aurora was saying, so important to find your people and rise together and help each other, be collaborative and be supportive. And for the men, to be open-minded about mentoring women, and bringing women onto your set, and having them as collaborators, as cinematographers, as co-writers, as producers, and having sets and creative processes that have, a very diverse group of people involved, will enrich your stories and give people opportunities and skills that they can build from, and launch careers. So that's my advice on mentorship. Thank you.
Thank you. Dilcia, final words?
Yeah, I mean, I think from what everybody was saying, I think a good point is just to stay authentic to yourself, and not to focus on trying to impress me with your work, trying to impress Sundance, because if you do, and you love what you do, whatever happens with it, you were true to yourself, and in that way you will find your audience, whatever that is. And in that sense, also think of your plan B, C's, and D's, and different ways of showing your work and talking about your work. And I know we talked about small can also mean in length, shorts, pilots. There's other ways of starting. You don't have to do the big leap or the big jump immediately. There's different journeys to get there. But I think we've all talked in length about authenticity, and to me, that's just being true to yourself. In the end, is really what we're looking for, and I think what everyone else is looking for within their own art.
Well, this is the end of our panel, and I've been really inspired by all of you, and thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your thoughts and experiences and emotions, and it's been a great experience for me as well. So thank you very much, and thank you to all our audience members who tuned in and asked questions, and hope to see you in Istanbul maybe someday for the film festival in the future.
Inshallah. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for having us.
Olha,